Martin Fowler, a co-author of the Agile Manifesto, recently shared misinformation regarding scientific research which cast doubt on the Agile methodology, which has since been comprehensively disproven. Even more disturbingly, Fowler shared these claims which originated from someone else who was subject to investigation for stalking the researchers involved. These claims were debunked with the help of 2 PhD-grade data scientists, and the original research had involved 3 doctorate-trained professionals. Despite Fowler holding the position of chief scientist at ThoughtWorks, this situation demonstrated he has shared fundamentally incorrect information concerning commonly used statistical techniques. This comes against a backdrop where ThoughtWorks' share price has fallen nearly 90% over the past 5 years, with the company soon set to be taken private and delisted. In the talk A Retake on the Agile Manifesto at GoTo 2014, Fowler stated the goal of creating the Agile Manifesto was to create a process which doesn't depend on the requirements being stable.
So these other folks kind of looked at that and said, well, rather than trying to spend all of this effort trying to stabilize requirements and prevent this bad thing called requirements creep, maybe what we should do is figure out a process that doesn't depend on the requirements being stable. And various people were hovering around doing stuff like this. So I got involved in the extreme programming community, which was part of the group doing this. Dave talked about this in the Pragmatic Programmers book. There were the Scrum people who talked about this, Alistair Coleman, Jim Highsmith, a whole bunch of people kind of coming up with these kinds of ideas. And one of the key things about what they were doing was this notion that we should accept change and in fact treat change as Mary Poppendick puts it, a late change in requirements is a competitive advantage.
Another later signatory of the Agile Manifesto, Alan Holub, has adopted an aggressive approach when it comes to rejecting upfront requirements despite the evidence that is emerging, stating on X, "Why are people so convinced that waterfall upfront, functional, requirements are essential? They're a disease. They're at the core of waterfall thinking. There is no place for them when you work with agility." Holub later went on to say, "Requirements, by definition, are limits. They remove choice. They eliminate creativity and destroy agility. Our research has shown that projects where there were clear requirements before development started were 97% more likely to succeed. Projects having complete specifications before development started were 50% more likely to succeed, and those where there were no late changes to requirements were 7% more likely to succeed." 2 Boeing 737 MAX crashes in 2018-19 which killed 346 people have been attributed to flaws in the software design, with those involved in Boeing's agile transformation having celebrated the removal of big upfront requirements.
And the last thing that was really wow is we pulled our systems engineering team into Agile and then eventually had them embedded in every single Agile team. And that was where we got some really cool cost improvements because we took the big upfront design and requirements out of it and really made it more of an incremental approach.
Ahead of the crisis, engineers at Boeing reportedly almost walked out of an agile training session.
And it was really challenging to change the mindset of a bunch of engineers that are building physical systems. At one point, I was teaching a class to about 80 of the engineers, and they almost all stood up and walked out of the room on me.
The post office scandal, which has been described as the largest miscarriage of justice in British history, linked to multiple suicides with those wrongly imprisoned, including a pregnant woman. At the public inquiry, multiple witnesses have attributed as a cause of the technical problems being the absence of a robust requirements engineering process before development began.
That's fait accompli. If you're not going to design something properly, it's not going to if you don't have a good design, it's not going to work properly. So if there was no design, and that design, first of all, there has to be a good design process. Second, that design process has to be aligned with a very well-known set of requirements from the sponsors. Only when those two things are done can you start thinking about the construction and development of the software. Otherwise, it's very difficult to make sure that the system does what your customers want it to do.
That's what they did, and back in the day there was a development methodology called rapid prototyping, which was a precursor to what's known today as Agile, which came out of California. But back in those days, rapid prototyping was very immature, and it should never have been used on a project of this size complexity.
Because one of the reasons why this got into this situation was we were forced to do rapid application development. And by doing that, you haven't got a functional specification. You've got what we call, you're talking to people and you're trying to get EPOS to sit POCL people to sit alongside you. And the problem was that we had people who were working in that environment that weren't very professional and weren't very good at their job.
Do you have any view or comment on the appropriateness of using RAD techniques to develop the EPOS product?
RAD is very good for developing something small, for developing something quickly that is just for illustrative purposes. But for a heavy-duty enterprise system that needs to be viable over the long term, it's terrible because you're not planning it. RAD almost means no plan other than I think I know what the goal is, and I'm going to get to that goal as fast as I possibly can. And there's good situations where that's needed. But not this is not the right situation for that. You need to do everything in a very methodical, almost militaristic way to make sure that everything works properly together, because I think I mentioned before, there are so many moving pieces. This has to be highly coordinated, and RAD is the other end of the spectrum. It's not highly coordinated, or it doesn't support coordination amongst big teams, because that's not the purpose of RAD. RAD is get it done quick, get a little bit done quick. And if you have 80 teams doing their own little part independently, you can't put that back together and think that it will work as well as if they were all very coordinated from the beginning.
Fowler has also advocated the use of software engineering metrics which prioritize speed above other factors.
The other factor that I brought up is mean time to recovery, and that's actually quite interesting in itself. There's a phrase that goes out there and comes from John Allspore, but mean time to recovery is more important than mean time between failures for most failures. And the point being that by putting stuff into production, it's more important that you can realize that something's gone wrong and fix it than it is to prevent the failures in the first place.
Following the CrowdStrike outages, job descriptions for Agile delivery lead positions indicate the use of Agile metrics within the organization, stating that in the role the successful applicant will create and report on sprint metrics and velocity planning. We urge influencers in the software engineering field to take their responsibilities seriously. The promotion of fundamentalist approaches to Agile without appropriately managing risks is dangerous. Critical thinking and accountability must prevail in an industry where the stakes can often be too high for carelessness. See the third-party article P-Hacking with Dinosaurs for further information on the claims Fowler made and a comprehensive falsification.